16th straight win in their 2022 season. We'll see Geelong crowned as premiers against the Swans on Saturday. It's certainly the hardest mountain they've had to climb so far this year, but it has been in what has been a dominant year for Geelong, especially in the back half of this season. As you mentioned, a huge winning streak has really seen them storm into September in fine form, and then being able to handle Collingwood in the opening round, only just, but then dismantling Brisbane in a preliminary final was really the statement, if they needed to make another one, to really signal to their rival for this weekend, which ended up being Sydney. But the Cats, absolutely fantastic. They've been the benchmark in the second half of this season, undefeated since, I think, round 9 in that loss to St Kilda. And across that run as well, they've picked up some pretty big scalps, albeit they've had some double ups against North Melbourne and West Coast, but it's been a really, really strong season for the Cats. And it's all come to, like I said, a 16th win in a row, potentially on Saturday in the grand final.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a time when a side's had such a run of form heading into a grand final. I think you can look back maybe to St Kilda. I think it was 2009 when they won about 20 games. I think they were 17-0, but even then they hit a bit of a snag going into the final day and then obviously lost. But to think about what the Cats have done, it's been remarkable. Yeah, they've had some easy games in there, quote unquote, but they beat Melbourne at home comprehensively. This in the finals, they managed to beat Collingwood, which barely anyone's been able to do in the past 3 months, and then they took Brisbane apart. Maybe Brisbane were there for the taking, but you still got to do the job, and I think that's been a query on the Cats for a while, is whether they've been able to win those games that in finals we all just expect them to. They've kind of meekly gone, especially last year. So for them to be able to respond the way they have, I mean, they could not have asked for a better run in. Are they due for a loss? Yes, of course they are, but I mean, if there's any time to be due for a loss, this is the week for it, because it can only go one or two ways, so you may as well be thriving when you hit it.
Yeah, it's been an interesting September for them. A very close win over Collingwood, and really were able to fight themselves back into that game after giving up a few early points, and we've seen Geelong do that across a number of occasions in September in their first quarter openings, and then it was a bit different, obviously, against the Lions. A bit more even. Still, Geelong had their neck out in front, but then really put the foot to the floor in that second and third quarter, and then all of a sudden it was pretty easy pickings for them, and took their foot off the gas in the last quarter, if anything, to let Brisbane, put on a few goals, and then they were able to really rest some of their key players. So that was really important for them, but obviously as well for the Cats. What we've seen across the 2 weeks, has there been something between each game that's impressed you more? Which performance do you think is one that I think as the Swans should be focusing on, kind of that rough, hard, contested footy that they were able to kind of dominate over the Pies? Or do you think it's something that they look at how they were able to steer away from Brisbane, albeit in what was a pretty poor performance from the Lions?
I think you'd probably look at the Collingwood game mainly. I think it bears in mind that in that Brisbane game, they probably should have been 10 goals up at half time. And Tom Hawkins missed a couple of sodas. Jeremy Cameron missed a soda, which just isn't in their wheelhouse. I mean, that last 5 minutes before half time, the Cats really could have put the game to bed if it already wasn't. So I think you do have to watch that first half and just see just how powerful Geelong can be and how they can dismantle an opposition. But I think the grand final will take a similar shape to that Collingwood game. A little different. Obviously, Sydney and Collingwood are probably polar opposites. Sydney like to win the football. They like to possess the ball, whereas Collingwood like to win it back. And we saw what that battle ensued on the weekend. But you still would look at that Collingwood game, that intensity, that ability for Geelong really for 4 quarters to stick with a Collingwood side that Sydney really couldn't stick with when they put the foot down. I think that's what they'll look at. I think that's where you take your most fruit out of if you're Sydney. But, I mean, you could look at it, Geelong's ability to play different game styles. I think they pride themselves on taking your game away from you more than playing their own specific one way. And I think Sydney has to be more wary of what Geelong's weapons are when it comes to dismantling them and what it is playing their own way.
Now, the Geelong list itself, quite an intriguing one. Just when you look over recruitment, where everyone comes from, obviously it's been years and years of bringing players from other clubs in, but at the same time, their ability to hit some great names at the rookie draft, and then on top of that, even in the national draft, they haven't really had a top 10 pick or that many tops. I think one since Joel Selwood joined them in 2006, and that was Nakia Cockatoo, who was pick 10, and then outside of that, they don't really have a lot of those players that they pull in late first round picks and maybe even move them on, or second rounders, third rounders at national drafts, and then they pull up blokes like Tom Stewart, Tyson Stengel without a home, which has been absolutely fantastic recruitment from Stephen Wellesley. Exactly right, 2 All-Australians right there. And then on top of that, you can talk about your more aggressive list strategies, pulling in a Patrick Dangerfield, getting a Jeremy Cameron, getting these guys. Obviously, the Dangerfield one cost them a little bit, but the Cameron one cost them heaps as far as a draft hand in 3 first-round picks to get him down to Geelong. And it's
you could point
the
Tim Kelly deal paid that off. So it's another one they found. Like Tom Stewart, they found that out of nowhere, sent him, you get Cameron back in the end. It's all paid itself off.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic cycle for them. And then you look at, 7 years ago, you're picking up your Reece Stanleys, your Zach Tui's, Gary Rowan was only a few years after them as well. So they've built this, and it has been building for some time. We know, their dominance in September that they've had under Chris Scott's reign. And yes, this is what their third grand final under him. And I guess second since, if you take out his first year in charge. And they are yet to win one. So it is a lot at stake for this club, and this is what they've been building to. And there is the talk of, age, if this is their last chance. It seems like we've said that for the past few years, and that's what this club's recruitment strategy is, just rebuilding on the run every year, taking that next step, and who knows what it's going to look like this year as far as their off-season, particularly if they win and particularly if they don't, and what decisions some club veterans could make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Whether they win the flag or not could go a long way deciding what a Selwood, a Dangerfield, even a Tom Hawkins do. I know Tom Hawkins said recently he does want to play on, but I mean, you get that medal around your neck, you have those celebrations. Are you complete? Chris Scott's obviously won a premiership as a coach, but you're right, this is his team now. The team he got then, he inherited arguably the greatest team of a generation. This is his side now, and that is probably the one thing eluding him, and even Joel Selwood doesn't want one as captain. You can see these little storylines building amongst these guys, but for as well as they've recruited, you look at their draft haul, and yeah, they haven't had a first rounder, but what Stephen Wells and now Andrew Mackey have been able to do is remarkable. Some of the names, the Guthrie boys, Tom Atkins, who is just become an absolute superstar this year.
Mark Blitzovs out of absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, plucked in from nowhere again. Wherever they're finding these players, I mean, more of them, please. Graham Myers had his best game on the weekend. DeConing is an absolute superstar. I think he's about $80 for the Norm Smith. I'd be keeping an eye on that one. Jack Henry can go forward, can go back. He's won them games. Max Holmes, if he gets up, his role on the wing this year has been invaluable. O'Connor's been able to tag guys like Lachie Neale out of a game. Brad Close wears long sleeves. He's also very good at football, but he wears long sleeves.
That's important stuff.
Yeah, but what they've been able to do with those guys, I think, yeah, we like to make fun of the fact that they recruit older players and they do regenerate in the run, but they've been able to just keep guys like Sam DeConing back and hold them, develop them the right way, and then unleash them on. And this is easily the best Geelong side we've seen, I think, under Scott in terms of his build, what he's managed to build. Even got veterans now like Mitch Duncan. He was another drafted player. He was in that side that won back in 2011, I think it was. So he was in that side. He's still there now. I think what they've managed to do, the longevity they get out of players, it's just, you can only marvel at what they've built down at Continue Park.
Yeah, I think you look at the squad for 2022, it's so balanced. Yeah. Like, you look at their forward line, 3 All-Australian forwards. Down back, you've got, Sam DeConing, who's touted as probably the best young defender in the comp, certainly in that 22 under 22 bracket. And then on top of that, you have your Tom Stewart, another All-Australian defender, and I think, 3 or 4 time All-Australian defender. He's been at the club for 5-6 years. Absolutely fantastic return rate there. And then you've got so many role players as well, I think. And we don't see Mark Blitzovs down there anymore, but he can be if he wants to be or if he needs to be. And then Jack Henry's the same. You can swing him forward if you need to, but he can play down there. And we spoke last week about, I guess, when there was some concern over Jake Colajussi, how big of an out one of these little role players are and how much the Chris Scott side does need to shift around. So luckily he played. Yeah. Again, one of those players that really stood up from Geelong's bottom 6, or if he is in that bracket. And they just have so many role players to add and complement their best players. And then when you look at, Dangerfield had an absolute blinder. And Selwood was probably quieter, but I think he had his moments, Joel Selwood, in Friday night's win over Brisbane that just really went, I think, a long way. He had 12 touches, but I think just about all of them were really effective and really key in midfield. And then, Danger, fantastic. Cam Guthrie, always serviceable. So they've just got so much balance across.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even Reece Stanley, he's not a star ruckman by any means. I don't think he ever has been. But what they've just been able to get out of him, and then now what they're finding out of Tom Atkins, of Dark Blitzovs, all these guys that they just pluck out of nowhere, has been absolutely fantastic for them. But yes, some of these bigger names as well, and the storylines that you're talking on the Geelong side of the fence. Patrick Dangerfield came to Geelong for a premiership. It seemed like the Cats, I think, were pretty favoured to go into the 2016 season after their only season where they missed the top 8, 2015. He put them straight back towards the top. And it seemed like, the Cats were going to be well in for a flag in the next few years. Still yet to have one 6 years on. But, and like I said, his best chance, Danger, coming across from Adelaide in what was obviously a very highly documented move, and he's yet to win one. Joel Selwood, he has 3 under his belt, yes, but everyone does seem to allude to the fact that he's never led Geelong to ultimate glory. So another big one there.
And he was another one that was drafted into an incredible era. And he had an immediate impact, so you can't begrudge him that at all. But Selwood was born into this dynasty and fell into a couple of premierships. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. He was one of the best players in those sides. But yeah, for him to be able to last through that, gone through the rebuild of 2015 when they missed finals for the first time ever. Yeah, you can see it builds big for him. But the one for me is it's Patrick Dangerfield, purely for the fact that maybe when 2020 you would have looked at the other end of the ground and seen what Dusty did and thought, oh, geez, that might have been my role. Dusty took that game by the scruff of the neck, pretty much single-handedly took it away from the Cats. And he did so in the preliminary final the year prior. Danger hasn't done that in the final. He showed what he could do on Friday night, but maybe through no fault of his own, the game got away from Brisbane a bit and the performance loses a bit of that oomph and that power. But I think he'd be eyeing off that this is his game. This is his grand final. It's his moment to make a stand. His form and his body have been questioned, and we've seen what that can do to players with likes of Patrick Cripps coming out and firing this year. So does he take that little bit of inspiration? Does he get that bit of fire? And does he say, this is my grand final, I'm winning it? It'd finish off his legacy as one of the best players I think we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think, you look at Dangerfield on Friday night, started off like a house on fire, two of the first 3 goals, and put the team on his back to some extent. And like you said, Selwood's another one, and what this will mean for him, despite being at the club when they won 3 premierships. And then on top of that, like you said before, Chris Scott, we always know that, 2011 was, and that is no easy feat to come in as a first-year coach, no matter who's on your list.
Yeah.
But everyone's kind of thought that if he can get a second one at Geelong, it's certainly going to feel more like his in a way, and it's one that's been coming for some time. Now, kind of looking over this squad and towards and into Saturday's game, who is the player that the Cats have that kind of is the one that they can't afford to lose or can't afford to see have a bad game? Because when they've got Cameron, they've got a Hawkins to back up, and vice versa. When they haven't got Stengel firing, they've got a Brad Close or a Gary Rowan firing. When they haven't got Dangerfield and Selwood, they've got a Atkins and all these guys. And the same with the back line. Like, I think, De Koning is protected really well in his role. He doesn't have to, I think where he's positioned, he just has so much comfort.
Doesn't get isolated.
And if you lose him, you do have someone that can kind of shift around. So who is the players that are Mark Blitzarves? Is it a Selwood if they lose him? Is it a Cameron who's been absolutely fantastic this season? Who is the player in Geelong's side that is probably that barometer or that player that really makes the difference for them?
It's probably no secret to the people close enough to me, the people that ask me anything about Geelong. I think it's Mitch Duncan, purely because when that game's hot and it's contested, like danger, so they can all go in and they can crash bodies, but you do need someone that just has the finesse to get the footy, hit a target and stop the game. And that's what Kickmark does. Kickmark stops the game, especially against a side like Sydney that will bash you in the midfield. They will hit you hard, and it's probably an area where the game's always decided in midfield, really. But these two bulls of midfields, they'll hit hard all day. That'll happen. But what can go when the fatigue comes is the skills and the decision-making can go, and Mitch Duncan's don't. It's one thing he just holds supreme for 4 quarters. I think if he can do that, it'll go a long way to Geelong winning the game, because he can dictate the game, whether he does that from the wing, whether he does that from half back. He can control that football, and he can dictate the tempo of a game, which I think is such an underrated skill that he has. He can decide if a game goes quick or if it goes slow. And I think if they lose him, then they have to look to Zach Tuohy to do it. Zach Tuohy's normally that goer. He loves to just get, go, handball, receive. Because Duncan just has a balance that they just won't be able to replace. Who do you see as being the deciding factor?
Yeah, I think it's Mark Blitzarves. I think he can really just give him a role and he'll play to that role. Like I said, if you lose a De Koning, if you lose a Stewart, you lose a Henry, you've got a Mark Blitzarves. If you lose a Hawkins or a Cameron, you've got a Mark Blitzarves. If you lose Stanley, you've got one. If you lose a Selwood at Dangerfield, he's there. He's in the midfield. He can ruck. He can play down back. And you can. You might not need to throw him forward, but you can if you absolutely need to. Or he goes back and Jack Henry goes forward.
Do you start him in the midfield, Blitzarves? And if so, do you send him to someone, or do you send him back to maybe athletically go with Buddy? What do you be doing?
Yeah, I think that put him in the midfield. I think what you've seen from Geelong, they don't mind starting some of the older heads on the bench just to give them that fresh set of legs 5 and 10 minutes in. You'll have a Blitzarves and Atkins and probably a Guthrie. I think they were the 3 that started against the Lions, with Reece Stanley in the ruck. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think Sam Reid's also, and the questions over his fitness will be quite interesting to see how that kind of shifts them around, especially in the ruck. If they are forced to bring in a Joel Amartey, a Hayden McLean to ruck, then that's where Blitzarves can probably move into a ruck position as well and kind of use his experience to get an upper hand on a pretty untapped youngster like one of those two. So that's going to be pretty interesting to see how Geelong might shift Blitzarves, but he's the one for me. He's absolutely fantastic in what he's done, being able to not directly shut down Lachie Neale, but play a part in that, and then also be able to ruck, be able to stick yourself behind the ball. It's just an insurance that not a lot of clubs really have. He's the one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the role I always look back to is when Carlton played Geelong and Carlton were up and firing, and all the talk was on Patrick Cripps, and he absolutely monstered Patrick Cripps, who's now a Brownlow medalist. And saw what he did to Cripps there, and Cripps is very much of that Sydney mould of midfield. Luke Parker will himself in a winning game, but if Blitzarves can sit and blanket him, or if a Mills does decide to go to danger, man, Blitzarves can follow him. And there's so many ifs and buts and what they can do with Blitzarves. And he said his flexibility, I think, could be a massive deciding factor in whatever part of the ground Sydney decide to get on top on. Geelong can just go plonk him up with Blitzarves there. They can take him out of the midfield, move Tom Atkins to someone. Absolutely, I think your point stands really well there, that they can use him in so many roles that he is a priceless asset.
Yeah, very rich asset to have. That'll wrap up our analysis of Geelong. Obviously, you can head to zerohanger.com or on our Zero Hanger YouTube page for all the analysis for the game itself between both clubs, as well as some of our discussion on the Sydney Swans, all to come ahead of Saturday's grand final.